To Kenya now, where protests are growing following the death of an anti-corruption blogger. He died after being arrested. Demonstrators say he is just one of dozens of government critics who have disappeared in recent years.
Cries for justice and clashes between police and protesters in the centre of Nairobi. It started earlier in the week as peaceful protests over the death of a young man, Albert Ojwang, in police custody. He'd been arrested over a complaint by the Deputy Inspector General of Police about a social media post. As details around his death emerged, initial claims by the police that he had hit his head against his cell wall seemed less likely.
The pattern of the injuries, especially on the head, the bleeds, the hematoma that are found on the head, when we tie up together with other injuries that are well spread in the body, including the upper limbs and the trunk, then this is unlikely to be self-inflicted injury.
It sparked a countrywide conversation around police violence, with both the Interior Minister and senior police officials answering questions in Parliament.
The whole indications show that this is a crime that happened within the police station. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that those who will be found should be held accountable.
Yet what the protesters really want is for the Deputy Inspector General to resign. On Thursday afternoon, however, the protests escalated.
So we're here at the centre of Nairobi, and with government buildings and parliament buildings around, there are a few people who are sitting peacefully in front of the police headquarters, and they're protesting against police brutality. And on the other hand, there's a standoff here with more protesters down this way who are throwing stones in our direction, basically, where the police are, and the police, in their turn, are lobbing tear gas at the moment.
We later witnessed burning cars, as well as young men armed with whips and batons who went into the crowds and beat protesters.
Now, you see, it's been beaten like 20 people. We are looking for an ambulance so that we can see how we can get some help. They're not even police, they're not policemen, they are just in civilian, coming up, beating people, black people with black masks.
Ojwang's death, as well as other alleged cases of police brutality, come almost a year after Kenya's so-called Gen Z protests, where over 60 people lost their lives. As the anniversary draws nearer, there could be more protests ahead.
And we're going to talk about this with Eric Mugendi from Africa Uncensored and Odanga Madung from Odipo Dev. They are both investigative journalists and they're joining me here in the studio today. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for your time. Eric, if I can start with you, can we talk about what Albert Ojwang's death tells us about the Kenyan police, about their accountability, about their conduct?
I think, first of all, what his death says about the conduct of the government and how they are dealing with people who are opposed to them and people who say things that they find to be problematic is that they will use violence and they will use this as a way to signal to anyone who has any ideas that they would like to share with the general public about how the government should be held accountable. So they're going after people who they believe are figureheads, in a way trying to silence them and trying to send a signal to everyone else. Because one of the key things that we've seen as the government responds to this kind of civil action is that they will pretend almost to negotiate, or they will overtly say that they're open to talking or to dialogue, but then when it's actually time to sit down with people and have a conversation, they will then turn around and start saying, we need to respond with force, because what they are seeing is people actually initiating these conversations amongst themselves and going onto the streets. So they're doing it in a way that is essentially sucking the air out of these conversations and then coming back and trying to create an air or sense of them having the goodwill, which actually doesn't exist.
Okay. So if we can talk a bit more about their response. Odanga, I believe authorities waited until quite a high visibility political moment in Kenya, a budget reading, to respond to the protests that were happening. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell whether they were actually timing that specific moment, but I would not be surprised, you know, given the current tension that there is around the finance bill in itself, and given that, you know, a lot of what happened last year was around, a lot of the agitation that happened last year was around the finance bill and the budget reading. So I would not assign strategy to it, but I would not be surprised at the high visibility moment that they chose to announce the arrest of the person who had killed Albert, and allegedly, yeah.
I believe a police officer was arrested.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Is that, I mean, has that happened before? I mean, was he seen maybe as a scapegoat? You know, one officer was arrested, or was that seen as a concrete action to deal with the problem?
Yeah, so the thing is, for the people who are going to the streets right now, they do not consider the arrest of the officer, Constable Mukwana, right? They do not consider the arrest of the officer to be enough. Because the allegations are currently that the Deputy Inspector of Police, IG Lagat, is the person who ordered the abduction and the resultant killing of Albert Ojwang. And so a lot of people on the streets are going on and saying that they will not stop until IG Lagat resigns. Mm-hmm. and is held to account. And so a lot of people feel that this is a scapegoat, and that until he is held to account, that they will not stop going to the streets. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And let's talk about these protests, people taking to the streets, you know, fighting for what they believe in. Is this, I mean, how do you see these protests? Do you see this as a sort of a Gen Z mobilization? Is this, you know, how strong are these protests?
I would say that while a lot of the participants in the protests are young people, it is, let's say, cross-generational movement, because one of the things that people are frustrated by is the fact that the government is trying to increase taxes, and they're talking about fiscal responsibility, and then they are coming to people and asking them to give more out of their own salaries and out of their own pockets. But on the other hand, you have a lot of government waste and corruption. So one of the things that the protests are trying to communicate is that we are seeing our lives getting increasingly worse. But then the government will come and start saying things like, oh, we actually need to start taxing essential supplies more, which means that people's lives are actually going to get even worse. And then their policies are also pushing businesses out of the country and actually making them shut down. So we're having increased unemployment. We're having people who do not see a future for themselves in the country. So instead of them actually coming in and saying, this is what we're doing to make the economy better, to tame corruption, to do actual tangible things, they want to come and shake us down even more as ordinary citizens. So it cuts across. But I think the young people especially are more vocal about it, because they're the ones who actually don't have a future that they can see within the country because of everything that is going on.
One last question to you both. You're both investigative journalists. Do you ever feel threatened in the work that you do?
I mean, sometimes, yes, but I think the main thing is that the most important aspect is to hide in plain sight, right? This is very important, because the main job of a lot of these abductions and a lot of these killings is to communicate and instill fear in people, right? And so the key message that I think a lot of Kenyans are trying to send, even with these protests, is that we will not be silenced, yeah? And this is a very important message to send out to the regime in itself, that it doesn't, because when you look at especially even the manner in which Albert Ojwang was killed, you know, to arrest someone all the way, I think hundreds of kilometers away, right? And then transport him to the capital and then go ahead and brutally kill him. You realize that the brutality is the message, right? And so the biggest response that a lot of people can do is not to hide and not to be silenced. And this is a very important thing. And that's why a lot of people are going out into the streets today and insisting that they must be seen, they must be heard, and that they should not be silenced.
Eric, can I ask you, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so for us at Africa Uncensored, we've actually seen colleagues who've gone out and been arrested, been injured in the protests, but it wasn't overtly because they were investigative journalists, but we have actually seen other media practitioners being deliberately targeted. And I think the thing that they're also trying to do is to attack us at an institutional level, coming after us and saying we are being funded to support and conduct these protests because they want want to delegitimize the kind of work that we're doing. And for media practitioners and for people who are actually on the streets covering these protests, I think the main message that the government is trying to send is if you actually go out and do your job, then we will come after you. So it's very scary for people like us, but also we have the public interest in mind. So that kind of helps us in the long run.
Eric Mugendi and Odanga Madung, thank you so much to you both for joining us here at DW.